Welcome to part 2 of the hstp instructional series. Today we're talking about the Consolidated Grant Program, including eligibility and timeline, the criteria used by evaluators selected by DOT to score each application, and the ranking of projects by the regions. Washington State DOT uses a single process, one application per project, to distribute both state and federal public transportation funds. The funds come from the Federal Transit Administration 5310, 5311, and 5339 programs, the State Rural Mobility Grant Program for general public transit outside urban areas, and the State Paratransit Special Needs Program for helping people with special transportation needs. As I mentioned in part 1, people with special transportation needs means those persons who, because of disability, income status, or age, are unable to transport themselves or to purchase appropriate transportation. The Consolidated Grant application does not apply to state formula funds, regional mobility grants, or van pool awards. Applications will be available July 9th, and training will be provided through July and August. During the WSDOT internal review of consolidated applications that begins September 14th, community liaisons will work with applicants to ensure the applications are complete and accurate. The grant request amount may change during this period, but the amount submitted on the final application December 7th is the amount that will be awarded as long as funding is available. The exception to that is if a capital project has multiple components, it may be scaled down to fit available funds, but applicant will include scaling potential in the application. By the end of December, each regional ranking organization should send in their project ranking. Approximately 5 months before the new biennium starts, a panel of state evaluators score the proposals according to the WSDOT criteria I'll describe in a moment. The regional score is added to the evaluator's score, and DOT proceeds to match the highest ranking projects with the appropriate available sources of funding to provide funds to as many projects as possible. This table shows which entities are eligible for which types of funding. In addition, if a large urban has a rural route outside their urban boundaries, they can apply for rural grant funds for just that route. According to FTA guidelines, we have removed the option for private for-profit providers to compete in the Consolidated Grant Program. There is a new 4-year option for certain returning mobility management and operating projects that maintain performance as evidenced by quarterly reports. This does not need to get ranked again in the second biennium if you are awarded a 4-year award. An operating project is for the cost of providing service. Capital can be vehicles or technology or other equipment. Maybe passenger shelters would be eligible, but not construction projects. It could be dispatch software, bike racks, automated stop announcers, even fare boxes or garage equipment. Be sure to check in with the state or regional ITS architecture contents if it is a technology project, because the type of technology needs to be listed in at least a regional ITS architecture plan. Most types of technology are already covered, depending on when the plans were last updated. This match requirements chart shows the FTA minimum that is required in order to access federal funds. We use state public transportation funds to help you reach that minimum if necessary. We require that your local match be at least 10% for continuing projects and 5% for new and capital projects. While these are a minimum match amounts, it is a case that a higher commitment often evaluates better. A project's maximum match is determined by your operating deficit. If you have a lot of revenue coming in from other sources, your local match will be higher. We have some grantees that match at 10% and some that match at 70%. It depends on your other sources of revenue. Some agencies choose not to accept federal funds as a source for their project. The reason some agencies may choose to only apply for state funds is related to the compliance requirements. Some small systems are overwhelmed by all the extra deliverables and requirements associated with receiving federal funds, such as Title VI, ethics policies, drug and alcohol programs, DBE plans, and subrecipient site visits by FTA. The 2017-19 Consolidated Guide is available to anyone that wishes to learn more about the specific requirements. DOT has developed criteria for evaluating applications in collaboration with partners and stakeholders. In the Consolidated Program evaluations, comparisons are made between different project types, such as mobility management versus capital equipment. Evaluators are asked to look at the projects from a Gestalt perspective where, when considered as a whole, a project has qualities that are more than the sum of its parts. All applications will be evaluated based on the extent to which the project establishes, preserves, or improves public transportation services within a community, addresses a recognized need within the community, reflects a community process of coordination and input, leverages funds from other sources and/or documents local commitment to support the implementation of the project, appears to be feasible as described, connects to other systems and/or modes, defines specific performance measures to be used in determining the success of the project, describes an active effort aimed at improving the efficiency and effectiveness of transportation services. Applicant reports sufficient experience managing transportation projects and grants awards to ensure success. Applicant reports sufficient financial capacity and resources to implement and successfully carry out the project. Applicant demonstrates good faith effort to utilize and/or contract with disadvantaged businesses on the project. Contributes to the state maintaining number of public transportation vehicles within their minimum useful life, and complies with the state rules regarding alternative fuels. The evaluator score will be between 0 and 100, reflecting how many times a project was preferred over another project. For example, if we get 150 applications and a project won just 30 times in the 149 comparisons, the evaluator score would be 20 because it won 20% of the time. The projects are also ranked at the regional level, and the regional rankings account for a portion of the final score when added to the evaluator's score. Each regional planning organization has been allocated a number of ranking spots with grade scores of A, B, and C, identifying how the project comparatively scored at the regional level in terms of local priorities. In 2018, the formula for allocating A's, B's, and C's to the regions was amended to align rural population measures to FTA guidelines, to include a measure for people over 85, and allocated more ranking points to areas with large populations. Single county agencies are still capped at 3 A's, 3 B's, and 3 C's. This table shows a variety of scenarios that exemplify the impact of regional scores on the final score. Each region will design a prioritization process to assign the grade scores, and the ranking scores will be submitted by the regional planning organization to DOT after local review and adoption by the appropriate decision makers under a regional planning process. The hstp committee makes a recommendation to the planning organization board, but the planning organization decides the final ranking to send to DOT. As part of the prioritization process, input on regional rankings should be sought from public, private, and non-private transportation providers, tribes, human service providers, and people with disabilities and seniors, as well as interested members of the public. It is important that input from the stakeholders be sought early and often throughout the regional discussions on projects and project prioritization. Do not wait until the item comes before the planning organization's decision makers to bring these people in. As you begin to organize your committee, there are some issues to consider. For example, if your region contains multiple coverage areas, such as a 2-county RTPO, have an equitable geographical representation on the committee so that it's less likely to skew one agency's project score because it has more local residents voting. Here are some examples of common criteria developed by the regions for prioritization of projects. Preservation. Ensure that current resources remain in place. Expansion. New routes, greater frequency, bigger fleet. Meet the greatest need or unmet need, identified needs in hstp outreach or target populations. Coordination. Ensure non-duplication of effort, coordinate resources. Effectiveness. Quickly available, accessible, and adaptable. Cost effectiveness, efficiency. Identify efficiency by ridership, miles, hours versus cost. Return on investment. Paratransit over fixed route. Operating over capital. And congestion mitigation and greenhouse gas reduction. There's no easy answer for the best way to rank projects when operating competes with capital, like comparing apples and oranges. The way the evaluators come up with scores is to use the forced pairs method, comparing every application with every other application, including operating projects in competition with capital projects and mobility management projects. The needs of each region are different, and that's why you get to choose the criteria and the method for ranking. These are 3 examples of a process. Number 1, give a ranking sheet that lists every project to every member of the hstp committee that is participating in the ranking, and remind them all how many A's, B's, and C's they can assign. Remember that voting members should include more than just public transportation providers. Aim for representation from seniors, special needs populations, private transportation providers, and members of the public. Next, each agency gives a summary of each of their projects. Then every voting member will submit one ranking that assigns the limited numbers of A's, B's, and C's. Any member from an agency with a project listed on the sheet cannot vote for their own project. All rankings are collected and tallied on the whiteboard to come up with a group total of A's, B's, and C's. If preferred, the ranking sheets can be anonymous. 2. Develop a mini application that includes the name of the agency, a description of the service, and the criteria your region has chosen. Each project will have an application to be reviewed by the voting members and given a score, either at the committee meeting or ahead of time. The scores will then be tallied at the committee meeting to allocate A's, B's, and C's. This method allows people who are not available to attend the ranking meeting to do their own ranking and send it in. The third option is just to have an open group discussion about the merits of each project and come to a consensus about which projects should get which letter grade. This way is simplest, but it can lend itself to the sway of intimidation, depending on which agency has the most commanding presence. You should decide your method of ranking at the same time you decide which criteria to use. Now I'm going to read off the best practices that were sent in by your peers on these 2 topics. For developing criteria to evaluate projects, align it with the state criteria. Review previous criteria, what went well, what didn't work, what you could do differently, and get input from DOT. Working with a subset of stakeholders to talk through criteria options and gather feedback. Engage stakeholders months in advance to identify project selection criteria and weighting. Also identify unquantifiable elements that should be taken into consideration outside of quantitative scoring. On the process for ranking projects. Individual committee members privately score each project, ranking all projects with equal weight on one sheet, then turning in one sheet. Results are shared with the group. Outliers are removed to create a regional ranked list. Voting by members of the hstp working group, representatives from technical and citizen committees. Form a project ranking committee to score projects, develop a project scoring form, and confirm ranking process with key stakeholders. Ranking the entire consolidated grant application from each transit agency. Use negotiated decision-making process among stakeholders. Citizen Advisory Committee-driven ranking and project approvals. Deliberation and voting by technical committee composed of special needs transportation stakeholders. Base the initial deliberation on subcommittee and scoring from committee recommendation. This is a map of all of the different regional planning organizations, and when in doubt, I would say reach out to either your community liaison or one of these other planning organizations to get ideas about how to proceed. Thank you.